Well, as expected, it's happened. Stable Diffusion, one of the top performing AI-generated art creation methods, is being sued. Is this a good thing? Will it end the growing tyranny of AI-generated art? Or is this lawsuit ultimately groundless and potentially terrible for the United States? Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So I want to start this episode by saying that I have full sympathy for the people in the creative arts and the displacement that is potentially going on starting today or even the end of last year. I consider myself one of those group of people, and I expect that my job, or potentially multiple jobs, including making these videos, could be replaced within the next couple of years by AI. So we're looking at a massive disruption in terms of the way that society is going to be structured, a massive disruption in the way that knowledge workers, that would be creative people, people who work in knowledge, and particularly those who don't interact physically with other people. In other words, you create computer-generated art or computer-generated video or text or things like that. So I think doctors are a little bit further away, right? Because they tend to interact with people in a physical way. And interestingly enough, as opposed to many of the previous revolutions that have happened that have come from the bottom up. So for example, if you take the Industrial Revolution, it was the people at the bottom of the societal heap that were replaced by machinery first, which of course led to the Luddite Rebellion and other things. So, right, so that's always been the case. What could be happening here very rapidly, just within the last year, I've started to see this, become a possibility, is we could be looking at a top-down revolution, whereas the physical aspect of things, manipulating objects, picking vegetables in a field or working with patients or doing things like that, will actually be more secure in the near term. Now, I think that, things like Optimus, the Tesla bot, are going to start to replace from the bottom as well. So eventually we're going to see a squeeze on human labor and creativity and productivity. But what's actually happening here is, as opposed to pretty much every other revolution that has happened, we're looking at a top-down revolution rather than a bottom-up one. And so I actually predict a lot of pain is going to happen with this revolution. And, I feel bad. I feel empathetic because I understand where people are coming from. I'm an educator. These are people who spend years to decades training to become an expert at something, and then that could be replaced by an AI very, very rapidly. And I've spent years to decades becoming a very good writer. I hope a good writer. Someone who's educated in a lot of fields, someone who can teach people, and that's effectively what this YouTube channel is, and then also going out and being able to contact more people via a YouTube channel. So there are a lot of people whose lives could get disrupted, and that could flow into things like the legal profession, eventually a lot of doctoring as well, because a lot of it is not hands-on. So anyway, we're looking at just a massive revolution that's potentially happening here. And so I think that's one big reason why this lawsuit is taking place right now. We'll get into a little bit more of the details in just a moment. The second thing I want to be very clear about here as a preamble, which is a long preamble at this point, is that I am not an attorney. I have no legal training. I'm not going to be arguing whether this case has legal standing or not, because I really don't understand that well enough to know. What I'm arguing about, or what I'm talking about here, is whether in essence it should have legal standing from an ethical and logical point of view, not necessarily from a legal point of view, because there's a lot of nuance to legality, which doesn't necessarily come down to ethics or logic. All right, with that preamble out of the way, let's read the article that came out January 13th. It's actually kind of a blog post from Matthew Butterick titled, "We filed a lawsuit challenging Stable Diffusion, a 21st century collage tool that violates the rights of artists, because AI needs to be fair and ethical for everyone." So let's pop over to Matthew Butterick's link that he put in the thing. I'm going to block off, he's got a phone number and all sorts of other things there, and you can click the link if you want to, because of course I'll put a link to this blog post in the description. But I'm not going to go and potentially dox this guy. So I've cut off the bottom here, as you might notice. Anyway, it says, "I'm Matthew Butterick, a lawyer in Los Angeles, California. I work at the intersection of AI, copyright, and software. I'm currently serving as co-counsel with the Joseph Saveri law firm on class action lawsuits challenging GitHub, Copilot, and Stable Diffusion. I'm also a typographic designer and programmer. I wrote the book Typography for Lawyers and designed the Equity font family, which is used by lawyers around the world, apparently." So you can see that Matthew has some credentials credentials here, obviously, but he also has kind of an interesting slant here because he himself claims he works at the intersection of AI and copyright and software. So back to the blog post. I'm only going to read the first few paragraphs. There's a lot more detail later on, and I'll let you read that if you're interested. Anyway, hello, this is Matthew Butterick. I'm a writer, designer, programmer, and lawyer. In November of 2022, I teamed up with the amazingly excellent class action litigators, Joseph Severi, Cadio Zerpoli, and Travis Manfredi at the Joseph Severi Law Firm, and I hope I pronounced these folks' names somewhat correctly here, to file a lawsuit against GitHub Copilot for its, quote, unprecedented open source software piracy. That lawsuit is still in progress. Since then, I've heard from people all over the world, especially writers, artists, programmers, and other creators who are concerned about AI systems being trained on vast amounts of copyrighted work with no consent, no credit, and no compensation. Today, we're taking another step towards making AI fair and ethical for everyone. On behalf of 3 wonderful artist plaintiffs, you can see their names, we filed a class action lawsuit against Stability AI, DeviantArt, and Midjourney for their use of Stable Diffusion, a 21st century collage tool that remixes the copyrighted works of millions of artists whose work was used as training data. So first of all here, notice that OpenAI itself is not being sued, nor is Google. Both of them also have products that are very, very similar to this and have been trained on lots of data. And OpenAI is kind of the basis. Their CLIP technology is the basis for all of these diffusion models, including their own, which is dall-e 2, which again is not in this lawsuit. So I believe there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, OpenAI is now immensely entangled with Microsoft. And so I think that going directly against them might be a dangerous move, although GitHub's Copilot is also in that camp as well because GitHub was purchased by Microsoft as well. So I think not attacking OpenAI might be just a little bit of a wise move. Go after the small guys instead of the big guy in the room. But also Google's Imagen and OpenAI's dall-e 2 and some other ones like that are not really open source at this point. So you can't really see what's in the code, whereas these other products actually have open source software so you can examine it, so it might be easier to do litigation against them. Anyway, if I scroll through this, you can see there's a lot more information here that you can actually read about if you're interested. So there you go. That's why I'm not going to go through the entire article. But again, I would highly recommend reading the entire thing. But from now on, I'm going to I'm going to work at kind of a top level of this, and we can get into details in future videos if you're interested. Okay, so first, why is this class action lawsuit being brought? Well, obviously there is a concern from artists and creative people of all walks of life, right? We can take visual, programming. Eventually, there's going to be something along the lines of a ChatGPT lawsuit as well. So we're going to get lawsuits all over the board from any type of knowledge worker / creative artist. At this point, we're looking at visual artists in particular. I'll make a little bit of reference to the GitHub Copilot lawsuit, but I don't know the details of that as much, so I'm going to kind of leave that alone. It all sort of flows around the same thing. So I think the argument holds in general anyway. So obviously there is a group of artists / creative people, including former students of mine, who are up in arms about this whole AI thing. They're really, really against it. And there's a significant way in which you can tell that there is a definite feeling of urgency about attacking this technology because it could actually, remove their sort of existential reason to exist in terms of being a worker and a productive member of society. On top of that, as far as Matthew Butterick is concerned, I mean, this is a huge amount of publicity, right? These are gold star, like A++ types of lawsuits to get involved in. So this is obviously something that can raise his profile and make him famous / worth more money in his next lawsuits. Even if he loses, it doesn't really matter. So this is a way of him upping his publicity and public stature. So anyway, as part of this trifecta, I eventually expect that there is going to be a lawsuit against either ChatGPT or one of the outgrowths of that as well. Although again, I think him facing off directly against Microsoft and OpenAI, he might find that a little more dangerous to do. All right, so what is this lawsuit saying at the broadest level? And it's actually in the title of the blog article, so that makes it relatively easy. The lawsuit says, it doesn't just imply, but it says that Stable Diffusion and Copilot before it, although that's not what they're talking about, not what he's talking about in this blog, is an advanced advanced form of Photoshop. It's a collage tool. You grab bits of images and collage them together to make something new. Now, if that is indeed the case, then there is still an argument to be made that fair usage allows some of this if the artwork is not used for commercial purposes, which, let's set that aside for the moment, because obviously we want to talk about situations where we are using it for commercial purposes. If you're using it for academic and research purposes, there's all sorts of protections involved here. So I think that even Matthew Butterick would probably not argue against that. So let's just assume that this is going to be for commercial purposes where you're trying to make money off of that. But even then, if you make substantial alterations or you're transformative with the artwork, in other words, if you substantially change it, you still have the protections of fair usage on your side. But anyway, if this was the case, there would be an argument. You could have a legal case and argue in court whether or not Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, etc. are actually transforming the artwork enough that it's legally viable for them to be able to produce that artwork without violating the copyright of the original copyright holders. However, and here's a really big however, this is not what Stable Diffusion and Imagen and Copilot and many, many other products actually do. What they effectively are is a brain, just like a person's brain, and at a very high level that's the case. What they effectively are is a brain, or in detail, a massive tensor of floating point numbers. So we're not talking about a repository of knowledge, we're talking about something that is trained, again, similar to the way a human brain is. So these things, these models had access to lots and lots and lots of copyrighted data during training, but they do not use this data directly at all in outputting the images. And the same thing goes for text or for programming as well. So as I was saying somewhat metaphorically, is that these models act more like a human brain than Photoshop. In fact, fundamentally, they act more like a human brain than Photoshop. We human beings learn from books and teachers and video and the internet searches we do and all that stuff. I mean, look at all these books behind me, right? This is the kind of stuff where knowledge is acquired over time. And that the argument should be made that Stable Diffusion, dall-e 2, Midjourney, etc., Imagen, all those things, that they are actually learning in the same way, or at least analogously to the way a human being learns. And how is that learning process done? Well, I might, let's say I want to be able to paint the Mona Lisa or something like that. What I would have to do is first either see pictures of it or go to the Louvre in Paris and actually see the Mona Lisa. Then I would have to train myself. I'd have to take classes in art. I would have to learn how to paint. I would have to probably read books about art history and the particular brush techniques that Da Vinci used when he made the Mona Lisa. I'd have to look into the different types of paint and things like that that one could use, canvases, all of these kinds of things. So, right, I would have a training that would go on in my brain, and I would have to utilize that training to be able to create the artwork. And you might say like, oh yeah, but then you're painting a physical object and not a digital one. But what if I used Photoshop or something along those lines to actually create that artwork, which I certainly can. I can do it completely originally. I can use a tablet with a program like Photoshop, and I can actually paint this thing digitally myself. So the argument that it's a physical object as opposed to a digital object doesn't really wash with this. So anyway, in the end, after years and decades of training, I would be able to then paint this image. And if I was really, really expert at it, you might have a very difficult time telling whether it was the original or my own recreation of the original. And during all of this training, obviously there is some muscle training as well, but mostly what's going on is that our neural networks up here, our brains, are being altered. We're tuning them to think and or paint and or photograph and or use digital tools more effectively. So that's a training thing that's going on. Who owns the copyright to all of that training? Clearly, when I read these books or went and looked at a painting or went online and did searches or had a teacher teach me how to paint, all of those things are sort of in a way copyrighted, some more obviously than others, but all of those things are intellectual property owned by other people. And yet people aren't going to say, hey, John, you painted a picture of the Mona Lisa. That's not valid. Or we could take a live artist instead, like Banksy or something like that, right? So could Banksy sue me for creating something that looks like Banksy? Not really. In short, what we're doing is using feedback and training to become our own creative beings. And I know it's a little bit specious to say trying to copy the Mona Lisa exactly, because more than likely most artists and creatives don't want to do the same thing that everybody else has done, or at least another person has done before. What we want to do is make some modifications to that. But let's just take the extreme example of wanting to completely recreate something like almost exactly if you possibly could. So at least in my understanding from a historical perspective, if I painted Edvard Munch's The Scream, no matter how closely I tried to match the original, I would only face legal retribution if I claimed that it was actually Munch's work, in other words, a forgery. As far as I understand it, I wouldn't and couldn't be sued for creating something that was very, very similar, as long as I clearly identified it as mine and said, I painted this, not Edvard Munch, right? The situation would be if I tried to sell the painting for millions of dollars, and people do that, right? That's why there are art forgers, and they're really, really good at that. But that's where the legal problem comes in, not creating the work, but trying to pass it off as something that it's not. And of course, more generally, I can paint or photograph or draw or write whatever I want, as long as I don't directly steal a specific quote or longish quote from another person intentionally, or paint my signature on another person's painting, which would be, you know, just erase Edvard Munch's signature and put in my own instead, right? Or claim a painting or another work of art is a work that is done by someone else when I did it. Those are the areas that you can get into legal trouble. As far as actually creating the work itself, you don't get into legal trouble. So far from being a collage tool, Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and others like that are much, much more creative. So what we need to do is think of these AI agents as very, very smart people, perhaps like people who are savants. And I don't even know what the politically correct term is, but people who, you know, human beings who are relatively incapable of caring for themselves, but they're incredibly expert at one thing. So anyway, hopefully you understand what I'm talking about with that. But we could treat these agents, these AI agents, like savants and hold them to the same legal standards as human agents. And of course, legally and ethically and morally and all sorts of other things and existentially, that's a whole other kettle of fish, which we'll have to reserve for another video. But anyway, the import of this is there's a fundamental misunderstanding in this class action lawsuit. These things are not collage tools. What's happened is that these neural networks, these massive tensors of little dots is the secret sauce, right? That's the thing. It's this, if you could imagine like a cube or something like that with all these numbers and all the little cells. Inside of that is the magic sauce. There is no utilizing. They're not taking pieces of one image and sticking them with pieces of other images. That's not it at all. It's much, much more like what a human being does. A human takes in all of our experiences and then we express that as a creative work. And that is what these models are doing. Obviously with human prompting at the beginning of that. And so I guess if you're going to blame anyone, you could, you know, if you said, please give me a picture that looks exactly like Edvard Munch's The Scream, who's responsible for that? That's just a tool you're using in that case, right? I don't think it would still fall anywhere close to this because it's recreating that from its own understanding. It's not pulling that image directly. So the use of copyrighted materials is actually protected as long as you don't just copy them. It's a copyright. Transformation right, utilizing as an inspiration right, all of those things are very well protected from the side of the creative artist. Now, of course, the question becomes, is an AI agent actually a creative artist? Does it rate as a human being? And as I said, that's a whole other kettle of fish. So anyway, in my opinion, at least, and again, not a legal scholar, this is a completely unfounded lawsuit that should fail. Now, of course, the legal system being what it is, who knows what will actually happen. But at least from my understanding, this is a fundamentally flawed lawsuit. So fine, you say, you know, there's lawsuits all the time in the United States. It's going to work its way through the courts. Whatever happens, happens. Why is this so bad for the United States? Which I said in the title of this video. The reason why this is so bad is that we, for better or worse, are now in an AI arms race for the next economy. Economy 3.0 or something. If we had the Industrial Revolution, then the Information Revolution. Now we're looking at the AI Revolution, which is going to happen very, very fast. And it won't be televised. It'll be on the internet instead. But anyway, we are in an arms race right now. And this kind of thing could slow the United States down. And this race that's happening right now is going to determine the next winners in the forthcoming economy. So first of all, this lawsuit is spurious because the architectures are already out there. The tuning weights for many of these already exist online, like at Hugging Face and other places like that. And the code is out there for how to make it, the architecture, which is relatively straightforward and simple. So basically the horse horses, you know, metaphorically have well and truly left the barn at this point. So it's a ridiculous lawsuit because you can't do anything. You can't bring the horses back. Even if you sued one company into oblivion, another one would just pop up and do the same thing. Secondly, as I said, we're looking at a global arms race here, and companies all over the planet are racing to utilize and improve these products. In fact, individuals are doing this, not even just companies. And CES amply showed this. I mean, going there, it was amazing to see how much software was based on machine learning stuff that's going on. So, you know, all of this means that we're looking at not just the United States, but every other major player, and who knows, maybe, you know, small countries that have had a lot of economic difficulty because they haven't been able to catch up. We could look at them leapfrog. That would be an amazing thing to see what we would consider a developing country be able to create some companies that were very, very at the forefront of this. But no matter what happens, in short, you can't sue the world, right? You can't go around suing everybody on the entire planet. It would just take way, way, way too long. So if lawsuits like this happen in the United States and they persist and they actually win at some levels, that could actually chill innovation in the United States drastically and force companies to move elsewhere to do their work. And let me tell you, this could massively hurt the US and this new world economy. And finally, of course, even fast-tracked, we're looking at 9 months to a year to bring forth and prosecute this case. And by that time, this technology is going to be old news. So the suit won't really have an effect on the current technology, except that it could bankrupt groups like Stable Diffusion, reducing competition, and of course, scaring companies from operating in the United States. So it could drastically reduce the growth of the market without having any really important effect, because they're going to be on to the next version of technology. Hell, within the next couple of weeks, we're going to be on to the next version of technology, right? So these are just frivolous lawsuits that are being created for people to gain publicity, to make people feel better about what's inevitably happening right now. And the only effect they're going to have is a negative effect on the broader economy in any country that allows these lawsuits to go forward. So if you thought that I wasn't opinionated, now you know that I pretty well am. One thing I wanted to do is I wanted to ask another expert opinion. So what I figured I would do is finish this video by asking ChatGPT to weigh in on this very topic. So here we go.
I would like to address the issue of the use of copyrighted data in the training data set of the Stable Diffusion model, which is the subject of this class action lawsuit. The plaintiff argues that the use of copyrighted data in the training data set of the model constitutes copyright infringement and should be prohibited. However, it is important to note that the use of copyrighted data in the training of machine learning models is a common practice in the field of artificial intelligence and is generally considered to be a fair use under copyright law. This is because the use of copyrighted data in the training of a machine learning model is considered to be transformative in nature, as it is being used for a different purpose than the original intent of the copyright holder. Additionally, the use of copyrighted data in the training of a machine learning model does not typically compete with the market for the original work, as the original work is not being sold or distributed. Moreover, it is worth highlighting that many companies and researchers have implemented techniques such as de-identification, data masking and data sampling to further minimize the risk of copyright infringement while training their models. It is also important to note that in most cases, the use of copyrighted data in the training of a machine learning model will not result in the creation of a new work that is substantially similar to the original copyrighted work. The Stable Diffusion model, like all machine learning models, is only able to make predictions based on the patterns it has learned from the training data. It does not generate new creative works, it is not able to replicate the original copyrighted work, and it is not a substitute for it. In conclusion, the use of copyrighted data in the training data set of the Stable Diffusion model is a common practice in the field of artificial intelligence and is generally considered to be a fair use under copyright law. The use of copyrighted data in the training of a machine learning model is considered to be transformative in nature and does not typically compete with the market for the original work. Additionally, many companies and researchers have implemented techniques such as de-identification, data masking and data sampling to further minimize the risk of copyright infringement while training their models.
So isn't that fascinating that ChatGPT had a lot of the same arguments I did, which I created my entire script and I thought about this whole thing before I asked ChatGPT. So I can't say that I stole from ChatGPT, but I think it's just remarkable how cogent it was. It probably did a better job than me because it was much more efficient in the way it presented that. So yeah, I got to give it that. But anyway, you can see how these models, right? These things can start to replace people. I could have written this entire script probably just using ChatGPT instead of doing it myself. I don't know. I mean, these things are disruptive and it's terrifying to me as well. So I don't want anybody to think here that I'm just like, la, 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 this should just happen willy-nilly, no problems. But what I am saying is that these lawsuits are actually a net negative for the United States because there's lots of other countries in the world. People can do this everywhere. And it's going to be a major problem if the United States stalls this development and other people keep going. Because regardless of what happens to the individual worker, the economy of the future is going to be based around this. I'm very firmly convinced about that. And the United States needs to be leading that charge as they currently are, rather than getting behind. I mean, hell, take solar panels, for example, as a previous thing. And I know that's a physical object that's manufactured, but the United States produced most of the solar panels in the early days and now produced very, very few of them. They're mostly made in China. So, you know, you don't want to give up this lead because you can't get it back again. So I'm kind of begging everybody who's really feeling the fear of the disruption of all of this to consider the broader picture. It's actually better to live in a stable, wealthier economy and hopefully get universal basic income and stuff like that than it is to bankrupt your own economy and watch the rest of the world pass you by. All right, so that is a lot to take in. I'm sure you have thoughts. Please do let me know in the comments. I really am interested. I'm sure there's plenty of legal scholars who will say I'm completely wrong about X, Y, and Z, and this is the reason why there's some validity to this lawsuit. And that's totally fine. Just please be constructive in the comments, right? Don't call me an idiot. You can call my argument idiotic, but please don't call me an idiot or other people in the comments, etc. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please do like it so other people can find it, because I think this is an important video. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have Tesla Bot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And finally, don't forget that we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.